Welcome back to Green is Good, and we're so honored to have with us today Stephanie Hodge. She's the UNICEF Cross-Sector Program Specialist in the Education Department. Welcome to Green is Good, Stephanie Hodge.
Well, thank you for having me.
Oh, we're so honored to have you on today. And Stephanie, before we get into UNICEF and all the great stuff you're doing there, talk a little bit about Stephanie Hodge. Like, how did you end up here? Talk a little bit about your journey leading up to this position and all that kind of wonderful stuff that our listeners want to know.
Well, I was a curious kid. I also had the UNICEF boxes when I was a kindergarten student. I mean, from an early age, I had the interest in things around, nature and human rights and definitely child rights. And UNICEF was a big UN brand as a child. My journey was really, I was a very adventurous kid and ended up teaching in Africa as a young teacher. But then I found myself in the Okavango Delta, remembering all those mutual Omaha programs, all about beautiful nature and all those things. And that led me really into the exploration of environmental education and climate change education today at UNICEF.
Oh my gosh! I just think my childhood just flashed in front of me. The orange boxes and the Mutual of Omaha. I have goosebumps right now. Oh my gosh, Stephanie! So talk a little bit about. I'm on your wonderful website for our listeners out there that want to follow along as we have this chat with Stephanie. It's UNICEF. UNICEFUSA.org. It's a gorgeous website. UNICEFUSA.org. Talk a little bit about what UNICEF, the original mission of UNICEF, and how the organization has evolved.
Well, UNICEF started after the war. I mean, basically it was the UNICEF Fund, emergency fund for children. And basically we started with, really sort of providing that emergency relief after the World War and, handing out the little school in the box, and schooling became a big part of emergency programs. And it just grew from there. The mission is children, support to children, not only in emergencies, but also in development situations, like in terms of their rights. So their right to education, their right to health, their right to nutrition, their right to water and sanitation, children's rights and children's protection is UNICEF's mandate.
So now the issue of children, which is so important. How and every day, before we came to the studio today, I was watching something on television about climate change, and there's still some people that don't believe it's actually happening, which is still unreal. I'm sitting there just scratching my head while I'm watching television. Talk a little bit about the impact that climate change is having on children around the globe today.
Well, as the mother of all environmental problems, climate change is a proxy indicator for what's going on with the environment. I'm from Newfoundland. Basically, we're having the Icelandic shelf is coming to our shores now in an extraordinary pace. I mean, the impact, the evidence is there. I mean, even in our daily lives, even here in New York, with the hotter summers and the more erratic weather. But the impact is definitely hitting children. It's hitting school infrastructure in terms of increased natural disasters. It's really impacting on their right to learn because of the learning outcomes are being impacted by this global trend that's related to climate change migration, increased migration in population, human population, and changes in the traditional learning environment as a result of that increased migration. So we're getting a lot more people with a lot more need in a small classroom. They have a lot more needs in terms of languages, things like that. We have a need for, there's growing inequality as a result to this proxy indicator of what's going on in our environment, and these are structural issues around structural development issues, really creating greater global divide between rich and poor, and that gets right down even to communities in small villages. You still get that disparity. That disparity is linked to what's going on in the environment and the fact that the environmental externalities are not being factored into development. The poor are getting poorer and the rich are getting richer. Insurance, land degradation, insurance access for the poor is also becoming something difficult. We have that here at Sandy. You see who has the insurance.
That's
so
a
there
great
you are.
point. And isn't it fascinating, Stephanie, in that when we talk about climate change, the deniers act like it's not going to ever happen, but the truth is it's happening now. This is not a problem that's, if we don't act now, it's going to happen in 30 years. As you just pointed out with Sandy and the degradation that's already happening, this is something that you're going to deal with, I'm going to deal with, our children are going to deal with, our grandchildren are going to deal with, but it starts now. Yeah. But talking it a little bit about jumping forward, how bad is then the roll forward effect 20, 30 years from now? What give me a little, give our listeners a little visibility on what you see, because people like you that have a worldview and have the opportunity to both travel and also have some of the best experts in the world on these issues, that you are involved with, explain a little bit about what's even coming.
Well, I guess there's two scenarios, isn't there? One is if we stay on the unsustainable path, then there's going to continue to be environmental degradation and growing inequality.
Right.
More changes in the climate, more vulnerability, more poverty, more altered land use, more land degradation. However, if we take the more sustainable path where we start to really factor in those environmental externalities in our planning, in our daily lives, then of course, we have actually a win-win scenario where we're actually leapfrogging some of the problems because we're taking affirmative action around structural problems, around equity, around sectoral planning, around cost-benefit analysis, around the environment, really pricing that environment right. I think then the future is really a good scenario. So, we've got a choice, and the choice is now. And I think we're getting there. We're getting there. But it's disaster that's propelling our action, and that's I guess that's human nature.
At UNICEF? What's your mission in terms of reduction of risk to children who face climate change? Obviously, the children are always in any population some of the most vulnerable people, and if not the most vulnerable to any external forces that are larger than life, such as climate change. What are some of the factors and some of the mission statements that you guys are working on to reduce the risk to children?
Okay, well, UNICEF, as I said, started as an emergency agency. Yeah. So, wherever there are natural disasters, UNICEF is there 24/7. They're there from the first moment of that emergency. It's there to provide sort of relief services. But then UNICEF really does get involved in, going beyond the Band-Aid. And that's where we get into the structural issues, especially in education. We look at the vulnerability of schools. We look at the structural changes that need to happen in the school infrastructure. We look at the need for more relevant content in the schools. We look at how you mainstream this knowledge into schools so that children have access to knowledge and resources and skills around the environment that maybe we weren't providing in past sort of scenarios of education. Like I said, the way that we address climate change education is really looking at this struggle for power over resources, and the access to relevant knowledge and resources, access to knowledge and information about who has access to information to support individual knowledge base and evidence-based decision-making, transparency and participation. Children should be involved in decisions that affect their life. Having access to that information is part of an education process. So making that systemic, looking at how to mainstream within the school system. So how do you get environmental education, for example, into teaching and learning? How do you look at the learning environment from the perspective that you have a green school, for example? Like how do you look at the cumulative capacities of a child to understand what it is to love nature, plants and animals from a very young age, empathy for the environment and for nature? These are classic educational outcomes, and they improve learning outcomes. Children who are interested in the environment tend to be more inquisitive, tend to really get out there and take action and just be more resilient.
No, I agree with you so much. And for our listeners out there that just joined, we've got Stephanie Hodge on with us. She's from UNICEF. She's really the environmental education guru at UNICEF. And I want to get into this. And please go to their website, UNICEFusa.org. It's UNICEF USA.org. It's a beautiful website. I'm on it right now. In fact, I'm just going to give you a little shameless plug here. I mean, what I love about organizations like yours, and I grew up with the orange boxes too, but this is so important, and more organizations should take note of what you've done here. Give with confidence. There's a nice green box on the cover of your website. 90 cents of every dollar we spend goes to help children. It is so brilliant, the transparency that your organization shows, that it's not being spent in overhead and other types of issues that well-meaning organizations sometimes get bogged down in. The money's actually going to go to the help that people donate it for. So, I mean, this kind of transparency I don't see enough of it. There's not enough of it, frankly. And this is, to me, a real winning statement right there. So, Stephanie, kudos to you and kudos to your great organization. Can you get into some more particulars, though? Since you really helped develop the strategy for environmental education at the United Nations Education Program, can you talk a little bit about the curriculum that UNICEF is promoting?
So, I mean, the curriculum is the heart of education.
Mm-hmm.
So I really kind of have to discuss that a little bit, because it shows you, how we approach this, which is really not sort of going into a country and say, okay, you have to mainstream this.
Right.
The idea is about transformation. UNICEF promotes child-friendly education, the curriculum being the heart of what the society and the school values is a process. The development of curriculum thus becomes a democratic process. Curriculum is the heart and soul, and therefore what we promote is really a systems critique. So you look at the environment, the educational policy and legislations around education, and you say, do you have environment as a kind of like a domain in that education? You also look at teaching and learning. So you're looking at that process, and you're questioning, is the environmental domain a part of teaching and learning from a young age? You look at the cumulative capacities of the child from, preschool, and you say, if you really want to create competencies around the environment, then the child should have the experience of the environment from a young age. So, how is the child getting into nature through the education and the curriculum at a young age? So we promote, starting with the love of outdoor education or experimental learning. So you love a tree, but as you grow older, that becomes much more concrete in terms of your expectations for learning outcomes across your school life cycle. So as you grow older, the idea of a child's growing capacities and ability to take action become a kind of a guide for that curriculum. And so as you go into grade 4 and 5, you start to have more projects with the child that takes the children into sort of a more of action mode. So you start to promote teaching and learning, or around little projects in the environment, school gardens, things like that really give the child a sense of a responsibility around the environment. Children can monitor that environment, and that type of love and stewardship comes as a growing process. It's not just about putting, science, environmental education in grade 10. It's about starting from before kindergarten and looking at the love of nature. How did you and I, for example, become stewards? We basically spent most of our young years interested out there, picking up the fish, looking at the trees, playing in the outdoors. That type of interaction and the love that's guided by the facilitation of a good teacher becomes then the learning outcome, which is really the stewardship, the monitoring, and the love of nature and the environment.
That's so important. And where can you give a couple examples where this education's taking place, like what countries or where particularly? So you can frame the whole thing better, and we can all imagine this whole thing. Yeah.
Okay. Unfortunately, there's two parts.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it's only taken place in pockets. But fortunately, it's expressing itself all over the world due to, like, as you said, the grassroots-based demand for change in education, and in particular around the environmental domain in education. Now, it's not systematic. Now, that's the unfortunate part. So what we try to promote is the mainstreaming, so the policies and legislations of schools to create, learning outcomes linked to that environmental domain in schools in a systematic way. But at the same time, for example, in the U.S., we are having so many great examples of green schools, eco schools, school-based private, usually though in private institutions or international schools. This is where you sort of get this. Because I guess the teachers and the administrators are starting to see the link between, more relevant content and learning outcomes.
Right.
So the international baccalaureate schools, they're seriously progressive. Countries, Finland, Sweden, these are really, and the Netherlands, they're really kind of taking this forward as part of a systematic mainstreaming approach. Many countries in the South, in developing countries, are leapfrogging to this type of education, recognizing that the education, the whole sort of traditional sit behind the school in a desk is not working anymore. What we want now is much more progressive education that takes advantage of the digital revolution and the fact that content is universally accessible now through digital content. We are not restricted to books anymore. Using our environment as learning pedagogy is now becoming really something that is going to make your country progressive and really give you, a sense of where and what children need to learn today. So in Thailand, you'll find a great progressive school. Well, again, it's a champion. Basically, the principal is a monk and very, very, very attuned to environmental goals, and he's decided to build a water school. Wow. The theme was the water school, but the stuff that's coming out of that school is really showing the way that children are being taught is more progressive. It's more attuned to what they want to learn. Children are naturally interested in the environment. We kind of like de-skill children from thinking about the environment. We also de-skill children in our current education from things that are natural, like creativity, like sitting behind a desk right now when there's so much opportunity for sort of more experimental learning. Really, this is about transformation in our education that's really going to provide us with a new thinking around education that's really relevant. Having children work together on projects in a multicultural environment, this is progressive education.
Wow. And that kind of progressive education, since you're one of the creators of it, do you feel we have about 2 minutes left, has it been effective as you want it to be? And are you happy and hopeful about the effectiveness of this type of education?
Well, I was at the Harvard School of Education, Project Zero, last week. Harvard has been really promoting this education since 1968. You just go to their Project Zero website. Yeah. We need more. We need more champions. We need more schools of education involved. We need more teacher education. This is what we need. We need the teachers to get involved in looking at school and saying, is this what we need for the 21st century? And we need more of those involved in the educational process saying we need transformation. And it's coming, but we need more. We need more advocacy. We need more journalists like you supporting the movement. Well,
we're down to the last minute. Any last thoughts or shameless plugs for your great organization and all the great missions, especially environmental education?
UNICEF is a great organization, and I tell you why, because of its staff. The staff are motivated, committed, educated. They are everywhere, 190 countries. They're working with governments on education, on nutrition, on health. UNICEF is a good organization. Partnering with UNICEF on what you think is right and protecting children around the world and children's rights, including around the environment, is really an important mission. So, thank you very much for this time, and we look forward to partnering with the U.S. population.
Well, and Stephanie, you're right. We need more transformation. We need more Stephanie Hodges, frankly. And for our listeners out there, again, UNICEF, USA.org, UNICEFusa.org, and 90 cents of every dollar you spend and give to UNICEF goes to help children. Stephanie Hodge, you are an inspirational sustainability educational hero and leader, and truly living proof that green is good.